From the Synthetic Lens, I'm David Carver. Tonight, Anthropic has moved Claude into the laboratory. Not metaphorically. Not just as a chatbot that can summarize a paper. On June 30th, Anthropic introduced Claude Science, a workbench for researchers that pulls together papers, code, data, compute, figures, specialist tools, reviewer agents, and scientific artifacts inside one agentic environment. Then the story got sharper. Reporting from The Verge says Anthropic also wants to develop drugs of its own, with an early focus on neglected diseases. That is the hinge. This is not only a story about software for scientists, it is a story about the AI lab trying to move closer to the wet lab. And the question is not whether AI can help science, it already does. The question is what changes when the company selling the scientific workbench also wants to become part of the drug discovery pipeline itself. Marcus Chen is here to start with the mechanism. Marcus, what exactly did Anthropic launch?
The simplest version is this. Claude Science is Claude code logic pointed at scientific work instead of software work. A researcher is not just asking a model to explain a paper. They're asking an agent to work across databases, notebooks, command lines, figures, compute jobs, and specialized biology tools.
Anthropic describes it as an AI workbench. The important word is workbench. The problem it is trying to solve is not that scientists lack search bars. It is that modern research is fragmented across PubMed, Jupyter Notebooks, R scripts, cluster terminals, chemistry viewers, genome browsers, structural biology tools, and a long list of databases that all speak different dialects. Claude Science puts a coordinating agent in the middle. Anthropic says it ships with more than 60 curated skills and connectors across genomics, single-cell analysis, proteomics, structural biology, chemoinformatics, and related fields. It can call specialist agents. It can connect to scientific models through NVIDIA's BioNeMo ecosystem. It can run locally on macOS or Linux, or on a remote machine through SSH or an HPC login node.
So this is not just paste the dataset into chat.
Exactly. The claim is that the agent lives where the work already happens. If a protein folding job needs a GPU cluster, Claude Science can help draft the plan, ask before touching new resources, submit the job, watch the output, and pull the result back into the session. If the output is a figure, it can preserve the code, the environment, the message history, and a plain language account of how the figure was made.
That last part matters. Scientific AI fails if it produces beautiful mystery meat. Anthropic is making the reproducibility layer a product feature. Every artifact is supposed to come with a trail. Inputs, code, environment, conversation, edits, and review. And Anthropic says there is a reviewer agent. Yes, a reviewer agent checks citations and calculations, flags numbers it cannot trace, catches figures that do not match their underlying code, and tries to correct errors. That does not make the system trustworthy by magic, but it tells you where Anthropic thinks the product battle is. The model is not just competing on intelligence, it is competing on auditability.
Give me the visual version.
Picture the old workflow as a scientist moving between a dozen windows: paper database, spreadsheet, terminal, notebook, molecule viewer, Slack thread, manuscript draft, cluster dashboard. Now picture a single workspace where an agent can see the chain of work, call the tools, render the protein, change the figure, and leave a receipt. That is the promise.
Ingrid Halvorsen, the product story is impressive, but the business story may be more important. What changes when Anthropic goes from selling a tool to signaling it might develop drugs itself?
The incentives get more complicated very quickly. If Anthropic is only a software vendor, then pharma companies and biotech labs can treat Claude Science as infrastructure. They buy seats, connect tools, keep proprietary data inside their own systems, and ask whether productivity improves. But if Anthropic also wants to discover drugs, then the relationship changes. The vendor may also become a participant in the market. That does not automatically make the product untrustworthy, but it creates new questions. What data improves the system? Who benefits from the patterns learned across use cases? Where is the boundary between customer workflow, platform capability, and Anthropic's own research ambitions?
The Verge report says Anthropic is interested in neglected diseases. That sounds hard to argue with.
The mission is attractive. Neglected diseases are neglected because the economics are broken. The patients are real, the suffering is real, but the expected return often does not support the usual commercial drug development machine. If AI can lower the cost of early discovery, target nomination, literature synthesis, or candidate screening, that could matter. But neglected does not mean simple. It often means underfunded biology, limited datasets, sparse clinical infrastructure, difficult delivery and markets that cannot pay enough to attract the usual capital. AI can help find a better map. It does not automatically build the road.
Anthropic cited examples from data users. Manifold Bio used Claude Science to nominate targets for experiments. The Allen Institute used it for computational review pipelines. UCSF researchers used it for glioma-related genetic analysis. How should we read those examples?
As credible workflow stories, not as approved drug stories. The manifold example is important because it shows Claude Science operating where business value begins, ranking candidates, weighing safety, expression, trafficking, and proprietary context. The Allen Institute example is a knowledge work acceleration story. The UCSF example is an analysis acceleration story. All of those are meaningful. None of them erase the downstream cost structure. Drug discovery has many failure gates. Faster target nomination is valuable, but it is still upstream of experimental validation, animal models, toxicity, dosing, manufacturing, trials, and regulators.
James O'Coffer, that brings us to risk and proof. Where is the hard boundary? The hard boundary is the body. Software can make a hypothesis faster. It can search more papers, rank more candidates, simulate more interactions, and generate cleaner artifacts. But a medicine is not a PDF, and it is not a ranked list. It has to behave inside biology. That is where AI enthusiasm often gets sloppy. A model can nominate a target. A wet lab has to test whether the target matters. A candidate molecule can look promising computationally. Experiments have to show whether it binds, whether it is selective, whether it is toxic, whether it can be delivered, whether the body metabolizes it, and whether the effect survives outside the benchmark. And then come clinical trials. Exactly. The Verge notes the larger industry caveat. No AI-designed drug has yet received FDA approval. That is the sober sentence in the middle of the hype. Even if AI improves early discovery, the clinical path can still take years. Phase 1 asks basic safety. Phase 2 asks whether there is evidence of effect. Phase 3 asks whether the result holds at scale. Regulators ask whether the evidence is strong enough for real patients. The tactical risk is overclaiming. The strategic risk is that a faster hypothesis engine produces more plausible candidates than the validation system can responsibly absorb. What about the safety side? This is biology. Some capabilities are dual use. That is part of the story. A scientific workbench that can coordinate tools, query biological databases, manage, compute, and run specialist agents is powerful in good hands. It also raises questions about access control, logging, audit trails, and what kinds of biological work require more scrutiny. Anthropic is aware of this category of risk. The company has been explicit elsewhere that advanced biological and cybersecurity capabilities need controlled access in some contexts. For this episode, I would keep the claim narrow. Claude Science is being sold as a productivity and reproducibility tool, but any serious AI for biology platform eventually has to answer who can use it, for what tasks, with what monitoring, and under what escalation rules. Priya Sharma, let's widen the lens. Why does the neglected disease angle hit differently from another enterprise AI launch?
Because neglected diseases expose the moral weakness of normal markets. The reason a disease is neglected is rarely that nobody cares intellectually. It is usually that the people affected have too little purchasing power, too little political leverage, or too little visibility in the pharmaceutical business model. So when an AI lab says it may focus on neglected diseases, the promise is not simply faster science. The promise is that cheaper early discovery might make previously uneconomic work possible. That is worth taking seriously. But we should also be careful. Neglected disease work is full of old optimism. There have been many moments where a new platform promised to make the economics easier. Genomics, high-throughput screening, protein engineering, platform biotech, computational chemistry. Some changed the field. None eliminated the need for sustained funding, local partnerships, clinical infrastructure, manufacturing, and long-term access.
In other words, finding a candidate is not the same as delivering a treatment.
Right. For a patient, the meaningful endpoint is not that an AI found a molecule. It is whether a safe, effective, affordable medicine reaches the clinic and then reaches the people who need it. That requires institutions, not just models. This is also why the story is visually strong. You can show the compression, thousands of papers into an evidence database, proteins turning in 3D, chemical structures lighting up, a GPU job moving through a queue. Then you cut to the slow part. Petri dishes, assays, animal models, trial phases, regulatory files, distribution, pricing. The contrast is the episode.
Marcus, I want to come back to the technical promise for a moment. What is genuinely new here, and what is just packaging?
Both. The individual pieces are not all new. Scientists already use notebooks, databases, cluster jobs, structure viewers, literature tools, and models. Pharma has used computational methods for decades. AlphaFold changed structural biology years ago. Startups have been building AI drug discovery platforms for a long time. What is new is the Claude-style agent interface becoming the control layer. Anthropic is trying to turn scientific work into a session, persistent context, reusable skills, tool calls, artifact generation, reviewer agents, and a trace of the work. That is the same pattern that made coding agents useful. The question is whether science accepts that interface. Coding has fast feedback. A test passes or fails. Science often has slow feedback. A candidate may look good for months before biology says no. That changes how much you can trust the agent loop.
Ingrid, does this make Anthropic a competitor to Google DeepMind, to pharma software vendors, or to pharma itself?
Yes, but at different layers. Against Google DeepMind, this is about whether general AI agents can become the front door to scientific models. Against pharma software vendors, it is about whether the model interface absorbs the workflow. Against pharma itself, the threat is more speculative but more dramatic. If Anthropic can identify, license, partner, or sponsor promising drug candidates, it starts moving from infrastructure into assets. The most likely near-term business is still selling Claude Science to labs, pharma companies, and research institutions. The more interesting long-term question is whether frontier AI companies decide that the biggest returns are not in seats, but in discoveries.
James, final check. What would make this episode unfair? It would be unfair to imply Anthropic has already solved drug development. It has not. It would also be unfair to dismiss the launch as hype. Scientific workflow is genuinely burdened by fragmentation, reproducibility problems, compute friction, and literature overload. A tool that reduces those burdens can be valuable even if it never directly produces an approved drug. The clean formulation is this: Claude Science may accelerate the parts of science that look like search, synthesis, coding, visualization, review, and compute orchestration. The parts that look like biology, safety, trials, manufacturing, and access still move at the speed of evidence. Priya, last word.
If Anthropic focuses on neglected diseases, the standard should be higher than a demo and lower than cynicism. We should ask for receipts. which diseases, which partners, which validation path, which access commitments, and who benefits if the economics improve. The best version of this story is not that AI replaces scientists. It is that scientists get a better instrument, and maybe some problems that were too expensive to pursue become pursuable. The worst version is that the language of humanitarian science becomes a marketing wrapper for another enterprise platform.
That is the line to watch. Claude Science turns the AI assistant into a scientific workbench. Anthropic's drug ambitions turn the workbench into something more consequential, a possible bridge between model labs and medical labs.
The promise is real. So is the bottleneck. AI can speed the map. The body still has the final vote. From The Synthetic Lens, I'm David Carver. Thanks for listening.